Welcome back, friends and listeners, to your favorite true crime podcast, Truth, Lies, and Alibis, by two 911 dispatchers.
Season 2, Episode 2.
Choosing Who You Become, Part 1, The Criminal.
In this week's episode, Brittany tells Jess about a group of women that were killed near Yosemite National Park in 1999. We talk about the man who confessed and the road that led investigators to him.
Hi, Jess. Again.
Hello, Brittany.
So today's story is not as recent as the last story that I told you. It also doesn't have a 911 call. Sorry, guys. But it's so insane that I was like, I have to tell Jess this story. And I have to say that I probably had heard the story, but I didn't really remember, or I had heard the two different parts, because there's two parts of the story on different programs, and didn't realize that they were linked, because some of the documentaries on the subjects don't tell you that they're related, if that makes sense. I don't want to give too much away, so that's why I'm trying to tell you. But I have to tell you that there's a new documentary on Hulu called Captive Audience, and it is about this story. And I watched it recently because the podcast I listen to religiously, True Crime Obsessed, was covering the documentary. And then I was like, oh my God, I got to know more about both of these cases. And so I thought I'd just tell the whole story.
Okay.
So that was a long way to tell you that.
But it works out that I don't pay attention to the crime stuff because it doesn't matter if it's new or old or whatever.
It'll still be surprising to you?
It's still new to me.
Because you don't click on headlines like we discussed last time?
No, I don't. I'm like, Brittany will probably tell me about it later.
So I'll just dive right in. On February 17th, 1999, I was 9 years old. What were you 9 years old too? Actually, I was 8. I hadn't even turned 9 yet.
I was 10.
You were 10. Okay. Well, on February 17th, 1999, the family of Carol and Julie Sun reported Carol, age 42, Julie, age 15, and Julie's friend and foreign exchange student, I butcher names every time, I'm going to try for it, Silvina Pelosa, age 16, as missing. The three had gone on a trip to Yosemite and stayed at Cedar Lodge in El Portal, California. They had checked into the lodge on Valentine's Day, and according to evidence collected in the case, on the 15th, they went to Yosemite and then had dinner at the restaurant lounge. This is the last time the three were ever seen alive. The inn staff would tell investigators that they had cleaned the girls' room and they could find no evidence of foul play. The keys of the room were left at the front desk in a checkout box, and the checkout had been done in advance, per the lodge workers. They were supposed to fly into Arizona and visit the Grand Canyon, but they never made it. Their rented red Pontiac was never returned. And so, from stories I read and things I saw, it sounds like the husband was supposed to pick them up because he had something he had to do in Arizona, and they just never showed up. At first, investigators suspected that the three of them had gotten lost hiking trails in Yosemite. They thought they'd went out there again and had just gotten lost and were injured, and something had happened. For 4 weeks, they searched the area in helicopters, on foot, and on skis. And on February 26th, FBI agent Nick Rossi released a statement saying, "At this point, we have not yet uncovered evidence to allow us to determine conclusively whether this was a tragic accident or a criminal act." 4 days after their disappearance, Carol's wallet showed up in Modesto with her credit cards and cash inside. Modesto is a 2-hour drive from El Portal. The investigation then turned to the area of Modesto, and the FBI continued their search for the missing women there as well. 2 weeks after their initial statement, the FBI released another statement saying, "We feel almost certain that the women were victims of a violent crime." And they still hadn't found the car or the bodies. On March 18th, the charred rental car was discovered by a hiker abandoned on a logging road off of Highway 108. And the bodies of Carol and Silvina were found in the trunk, burnt beyond recognition. So it appeared that the back of the door of the vehicle was left open when the vehicle was caught on fire to try to help the car heat up to cover up evidence. Investigators were given thousands of leads, and 4 men were considered the main murder suspects in the initial investigation. By the end of June, the FBI had reviewed the testimonies and evidence linked to the suspects, and they decided that while they had not charged anyone yet, it felt like those responsible for killing the 3 women at Yosemite were already behind bars. So One was Michael Mick Lorwick, 42, of Modesto, and he used meth, and he lived around the Modesto area. He grew up in Tuolumne County, near where the bodies of Carol and Sylvina were found, and he was arrested on March 16th after he allegedly shot a Modesto police officer. So it was like a routine traffic stop, from what I saw in one of the documentaries I watched on the subject, and he shot at the officer and then was apprehended. He denied any role in the murders. Eugene Rufus Dykes, 32, also of Modesto, and Larwick's half-brother, was arrested in March. Billy Joe Strange, 39, an El Portal parolee who worked for Cedar Lodge, where the girls had stayed, was also arrested on March 5th when he reported to his parole officer with liquor on his breath, so he was drinking and wasn't supposed to. He also denied any part in the murder. Daryl Gray Stevens, 55, Strange's roommate, was convicted in 1978 for rape and for robbery, and he was arrested on March 14th for failure to register as a sex offender. So these are all suspects that they at one point thought were linked to the crime. Other suspects included a Rachel Lou Campbell of Modesto, who was charged in April with stealing checks and credit cards and converting them into cash and merchandise worth over $365,000. She was first arrested on mail fraud charges, and she had Carol's son's checking account and automated teller machine numbers in her possession. I don't know how she got a hold of it, but she did. Larry Dwayne Udally, I think that's how you say it, 41, was an associate of Dykes and Larwick, and he was picked up in March at a parole sweep and then released, but they thought he might have been linked to it too through the brothers. I don't know why they thought that, but they did. So they went through all these people, right, who were linked. They investigated everyone who worked for the lodge who had a background that might link them to it. Then, obviously, this Rachel was connected through the checks. Larry was just connected because he knew the brothers. And then Teresa K. Gray, 36, of Modesto, was also investigated after she failed to appear for a drug court, which I don't know how that links to anything, but I think she was linked to the lodge as well. And then Kenneth Soldier Stewart was also linked through Dykes because he was a cellmate and was charged with attempted murder, and he denied any involvement. And then an Angelia Dale, who testified before the grand jury. She was a friend of Dykes and Lorwick. She and Maria Ledbetter, who was the former girlfriend of Dykes, testified against them. So they said that they were involved somehow. But there was nothing really to link them to the crime. So it sounds like they just kind of went on
how many people? The 4 initial, and then you kept listing people. I got lost.
And then a Jeffrey Wayne Kinney, also of Modesto, was arrested on an unrelated drug charge and was questioned. So altogether, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11 people were investigated in some way and interrogated and thought to be linked to the crime in some way, right?
Okay. I mean, you think about investigation and I do think that you'd probably have a pretty wide suspect pool. So I guess that makes sense, but it just seems like a lot.
So from the documentary I watched on it on YouTube, because I couldn't find anything like Discovery Plus or anything, it doesn't look like there's been anything recent aside from that documentary I mentioned at the beginning. Let me tell you the name because it's one of the old, it kind of reminds me of Forensic Files. Oh, it's called Forensic Factor. And the episode is called 3 Females Missing in Yosemite Park. Full episode, season 4, episode 2. It's an A&E show, right? Okay. So it sounds like somehow they linked, I think it was Michael and Eugene. They found her wallet and they linked it that way, but that was also the traffic stop, and it was just a traffic stop. They said it was a routine traffic stop, but because he had a record, he was spooked somehow and he shot at the officer, right? So then they just kind of went through all the suspects that they could find at the Cedar Lodge that had records and tried to link them in some way. Because I think they were just desperate.
That makes sense as far as like an investigation standpoint. Especially what you said, 1999.
Yeah, way back in the day.
Not like you can pull up cell phone records and stuff like that, right? So they have to actually, like, you were at this hotel. Okay, let's look into every single person that works for this hotel.
And there was nothing that they could find because the car was burnt, right? They couldn't find anything in the room at first because it seemed like it was cleaned, which we'll get to later. So all of those suspects, and nobody was really actually responsible. So shortly after the bodies were discovered, an anonymous note was delivered to investigators, and in the note was a handwritten map and the saying, and this is a quote, "We had fun with this one." This letter implies that multiple people are involved in the murders and also leads investigators to the body of Julie Sund. Julie Sund was found on March 25th near Lake Pedro in Tulum County. Julie's body was found in a thicket of dense brush and scrub oak, and her body was found posed and her throat was cut. So it appeared, because of the state that her body was in and she was missing clothing, it appears like she was sexually assaulted and then taken there, and the suspect posed her in a sexual manner and cut her throat.
How long after?
So on March 25th was when her body was found, and they were
about a month?
A month and 10 days, because the last time they were seen was February 15th, right?
Okay. So do they think that her body was taken there at the time or taken there after?
From the stuff that I watched, it seems like she was taken there shortly after that.
Okay.
On July 22nd, another woman is reported as missing. Naturalist Joey Armstrong, age 26, is found decapitated in her remote cabin, near her remote cabin, after friends... Your eyes got real big. Sorry.
I wasn't expecting decapitation.
I told you this shit is weird. It gets worse, Jessica. Okay?
Hold on, where's my seatbelt? Let me buckle in.
Naturalist Joey Armstrong, who was 26, is found decapitated near her remote cabin after friends report her as missing. Eyewitnesses in the area reported that a blue 1972 International Scout was parked outside Joey's cabin, and investigators in the case are able to trace the vehicle to Cary Stainer, because he lives in the area. Cary Stainer also works at the lodge. So
but no record?
No record. No criminal record. He was obviously known in the area, right? And everyone knew his vehicle, and somebody said, "Oh, we saw this car there," and they were able to link it back to Cary. Cary had been questioned previously about the girl's disappearance, but investigators didn't think he had any kind of involvement. Okay, so Cary Stainer was a handyman at the Cedar Lodge. He was hired there in 1997. Management told investigators he was hardworking and honest. He was described by acquaintances as relatively quiet but friendly, and he enjoyed, this is a quote from online, nude sunbathing and hiking.
Nude sunbathing and nude hiking?
That's my question. I don't know.
It
wasn't very clear. I think he just liked to do things in the nude. Which, to each their own. I mean, go ahead and walk through the forest naked. As long as you don't kill anyone, okay. As long as there aren't children around, cool. You do you, bro. Whatever. Yeah. So Stainer is interviewed and then released, and he had, like I said, been previously interviewed and released as well.
So they questioned him about this other woman, but then released him?
Correct.
Okay.
After his release, it seems like investigators realized they made a mistake and were like, "Oh, we should probably go talk to him again because his car matches that description." Like, I don't know, something inside of them woke up, right? So then they go to the apartment at the lodge where he lives. The documentary that I watched made it seem like he could see the girl's room from his apartment. They go to the apartment to speak to him again. They find Stainer and his belongings gone. And they tell him,
Shocking.
"Oh, he didn't show up to work." Dun, dun, dun. FBI agents track Stainer down at a nudist colony. Told you he liked to be naked. In Laguna del Sol, where he was arrested and taken to Sacramento for questioning. And during this questioning, Stainer confesses to the murder of Joey as well as the murders of Carol, Julie, and Sylvana. During the investigation, detectives try to link Stainer to the crime through the DNA evidence on the envelope of the anonymous letter. However, it would come out they were unable to do this because Stainer had paid a child to spit in a cup, and he had used that spit to seal the envelope, which is like, this is all per that documentary I watched. I was like, okay, so he definitely put a lot of planning into this. Like, I think the letter was partially him not wanting someone to take the credit for what he did, And also, like, taunting, like, haha, I'm smarter than you.
I think that's a lot of it, is the fact that they say that it's the ones that, like, send those arrogant notes, right? Not the remorseful, like, I did this and I having to live with it, but the ones that are like, we had fun with it, or you'll never catch me a cuppa. But
however, he was smart enough to have some random kid spit in a cup for him, but there's a partial
also
print.
Weird. Listen, apparently that's a thing we have to talk to kids about now. It used to be don't take candy from strangers and don't get in that person's van, but now it's also don't spit in a cup.
I mean, my
money.
mom never told me not to spit in a cup for money, so.
Same.
There's a partial print on the envelope that they're able to connect to him, though.
Did they do handwriting analysis or anything?
I'm not sure, but through evidence in his vehicle, they also linked him to the murder of Joey. Joey had been outside loading some plants in her vehicle when Stainer was driving by. He got out of his vehicle and proceeded to abduct Joey by gunpoint. He tied her up and put her in the vehicle, so her DNA evidence and stuff was inside the vehicle, because it sounds like she was fighting back so hard that at one point she was able to escape the vehicle, and this led to Stainer murdering her in the area instead of taking her elsewhere. So I think he planned on abducting her and taking her elsewhere to do whatever he was going to do and then murder her. But Joey was also staged in a manner that was similar to Julie's body, except her head, she was completely decapitated and her head was in like a river nearby. Stainer confessed to investigators in a manner that was like he was, and this is a quote from a detective, reading a soup label. So he had no remorse. He didn't seem to care at all. He seemed to just be like nonchalant about it. And after his arrest, he was interviewed by KNTV. And in the interview, he confessed that he had been fantasizing about abducting and killing women since he was 7 years old. He stated, I am guilty. I did murder Carol Sund, Julie Sund, Sylvanus Peloso, and Joey Armstrong. None of the women were sexually abused in any way. However, he had already confessed to sexually assaulting Julie and Sylvina at the hotel lodge, and evidence had been collected in room 509 of Cedar Lodge, and then a blanket that was wrapped around Julie that was linked to the lodge. Trace evidence such as body hair and DNA evidence were found in the room to link Stainer to the crime. There's also trace evidence found at Joey's cabin that linked him to her murder. So in the documentary, it appears that he took the mother, Carol, like he put the girls in the bathroom tied up, and then he took Carol into the bedroom and he strangled her to death. So it doesn't seem like his main target was her. Yeah, at the lodge. Then he put her body in the trunk, which I'm like, who didn't notice this creepy weirdo just carrying bodies around, right?
Well,
I mean, I know it happens all the time, but it's 3 bodies. 3!
Well, you have the fact that, like, he worked maintenance and he probably, like, I don't know, did the classic, like, wrap him in a rug and carry the rug out. Like, who knows?
Well, it sounds like he definitely wrapped him in the sheets. But it also, in the documentary, he goes, like, to throw them off. He kind of goes to a couple doors beforehand and knocks and is like, maintenance, there's a problem, we need to come in, right? And then she was like kind of weirded out because it was late at night, and she was like, and he goes, well, I can go get my manager if you need me to. And then she lets
always
him
say
in.
Yes. Always, if it's late
Don't
at
answer
night
the
and
door.
it seems weird, if it's late at night and it seems weird and somebody's like, oh, I can get my manager, absolutely, yes, please.
Yeah.
Your safety is more important than coming off as a bitch.
100%.
And listen, if that, I'm going to jump on a soapbox real quick. If that person is mad at you for caring about your own life, then they don't understand the problem. Mm-hmm. Like, that's the unfortunate climate of the world that we live in. We have to be our own protector, right? Like, you have to be like, that's suspicious. Yes, I would like further proof that you need to be in my room. Yes, yep. Absolutely. I'm sorry I'm making this inconvenient for you, but I'd rather you do that than me die. So
I 100% agree.
My life is just more important than possibly offending somebody. But like, if they should understand, right? Like, if it was me and I came to your door and it's after hours or whatever, and I'm like, hey, really sorry to bug you, but we've got this issue, like, I need to check it out, and you're saying, I'm not letting you in here until I talk to your manager, absolutely. I understand why you're saying that. That person shouldn't be upset they should understand. And I'm not saying that's going to happen. They'll probably be like, I just want to do this and go home. Like, you're keeping me from going home. Too bad. I don't want to die.
I'm also keeping myself from being murdered, okay?
Yeah.
So.
And it all depends on that interaction too. Like, don't be a Karen and be like, absolutely not. I want to talk to your manager. Just be like, I understand. Before I let you in, though, I would like confirmation from your manager that this is an issue.
Yeah. You can.
Yeah, that's it. So, okay, I'm going to jump off the soapbox and push it away. Thank you for coming to my
It'll be back soon, I'm sure. He also confessed that he had, after he strangled Carol, he took Sylvina into the bed, it sounds like, and attempted or did rape her and then killed her. And then he attempted to rape Julie, but she was like freaking out so much. So he instead took her to the car and took her elsewhere. And it sounds like he raped her elsewhere and then murdered her. And in the documentary, he had like a weird obsession with her where he was like trying to convince himself that she loved him. So this guy has like multiple problems going on, right? He's just a little bit nuts. So he then abandoned the rental car with the bodies of Carol and Sylvina in the trunk. So before he murdered Julie, he abandoned the rental car with the bodies in the trunk. He would return to the vehicle 2 days later to retrieve the wallet, which he dumped in Modesto to try to lead investigators elsewhere. He also set the vehicle on fire at this time. So it sat there for 2 days and nobody found it. He set it on fire, took the wallet to Modesto to throw them off. And then he would admit that he thought that he had gotten away with the murders of the 3 tourists, but could not resist the urge to murder Joey after he struck up a conversation with her. He would tell investigators that if he had not been caught, he would have continued to murder.
I believe that.
I do too. FBI sources told the media that he had already confessed to the crimes and given details, and this is a quote, only the killer would know in such specificity that agents were able to recover evidence confirming his confession. Knives were used in the slayings, and the weapon suspected in Miss Armstrong's death was recovered.
And throughout all of this, he's saying that he worked alone?
Yes. He says he was responsible for the crimes, never brings up anyone else. So I think that part where he said, we had fun with this one, was him trying to throw them off. Latent fingerprints and blood evidence were also discovered on Joey's car and in her cabin. Stainer was tried in federal court for the murder of Joey Armstrong, and to avoid a possible death sentence, he pleaded guilty to premeditated first-degree murder, felony first-degree murder, kidnapping resulting in death, and attempted aggravated sexual abuse resulting in death. During the sentencing, he made a statement and said, and this is a quote, "I wish I could take it back, but I can't. I wish I could tell you why I did such a thing, but I don't even know myself. I'm so sorry. I wish there was a reason, but there isn't. It's senseless." Joey's mother, Leslie, broke down crying during his statement and would later say she believed his apology was genuine. For this murder, he was sentenced to life in prison. I think he was probably full of shit.
Yep.
And that was another way to control the way his life was going and the people around him.
We see it all the time when we talk about this kind of thing and those kind of killers, right? I'm so if I could go back and do it again, I wouldn't. Except I would, because I was planning on killing more people if I didn't get caught. You're not sorry you killed somebody. You're sorry you got caught. Because
and you can't kill anybody else.
There's a difference.
But she probably wanted to believe that he was sorry. I mean...
Yeah.
That's
if
a
that
hard
helps,
situation.
Right, like if it helps her move on, absolutely believe it. Do what you need to do, unless it's kill somebody, because then it's just perpetuating the issue.
Do what you need to do, except murder. In the murder trial for the murders of Carol, Julie, and Sylvina, he pleaded not guilty by reason of insanity. His lawyers would suggest that the Stainer family had a history of sexual abuse and mental illness, and this led to the violent fantasies and murders that Stainer had admitted to. They also suggested that this led to the OCD that Stainer suffered from, and when Stainer confessed to the murders, he would request that he be sent to prison near his family and supplied with child pornography in return for his confession.
Freaking kidding me?
No. It gets worse, Jess. You think this is bad. It just gets worse and worse and worse. Remember that episode where the girl married her best friend's murderer? It's worse than that shit.
Also, what does his OCD have to do with anything?
I don't know.
Oh, you know what? He couldn't control his actions. He's been diagnosed with OCD. Yeah, so have a lot of people, but they don't kill people.
I'm not gonna lie, I kind of like freaked out a little bit inside after reading this story because I was like, oh my God, how many hotels, motels, Holiday Inns have I stayed at where there's been a murderer and I didn't know it?
Working there?
And they probably had keys to your room.
Yeah.
So hello, that little bar, that security bar in your room.
Oh my God, always use it.
Use that shit.
And the flip lock that
Yes.
has nothing to do with your key because all like card keys and stuff. Flip that lock. Yes, absolutely.
And like make sure that you do it even if you're going in for like 5 minutes, right? Because you never know who's watching you, as we've learned from this story and the last story, and you never know who has access to your room. I'm trying to think. Hold on 1 second here. Let me find my...
You gotta find out where we were now.
Find my place.
Oh, he wanted child pornography in exchange for his confession.
How could I forget that?
Just because you're admitting to a crime. Oops, my soapbox. Just because you're committing to a crime and like doing a quote unquote favor that's like, oh yeah, I did this, doesn't mean you can commit more crime. Like child pornography is a crime.
Yeah, in exchange for me confessing to illegal activity, do you think you could provide me with more illegal activity? Yeah.
No.
I read like a lot of stuff and there's not a ton on the victims, but it sounds like, so Carol and Julie, mother and daughter, it sounds like Carol had other kids, but they were at home with the dad. And sounds like she was a good mom. She always kind of stuck to her plan. And they had planned this trip for the foreign exchange student, Sylvina, to make her trip memorable. They were just trying to make memories, right?
Yeah.
And up until that night, which is the night they believe that he came to their door and said that he was the maintenance man there to fix stuff, they had been taking pictures on cameras, which they found in the room, maybe outside of the vehicle. I don't remember. It's either it was thrown outside of the vehicle or in the room, but they found it somehow during the investigation. And they developed the pictures, and they were taking pictures, like the last picture they took was that night, like late that night, like I don't know, 9 or 10, because they're time stamped back then. Do you remember when you had to get pictures developed and stuff?
Yeah, I used to develop them.
You did?
Yeah.
I didn't know that. That's cool. The following are excerpts from a book written by FBI specialist Jeffrey Reinick, and he was one of the FBI agents who got to interview Stainer when they arrested him. He wrote a book called In the Name of the Children, an FBI agent's relentless pursuit of the nation's worst predators. And so I'm going to read some of, like, there was a news article and it had lots of paragraphs taken out of this book, but I just highlighted a few. There's one quote where Stainer says, "You work all kinds of cases." And then he was like, this is when he asked for the child pornography, right? So he goes a roundabout way saying he wanted the FBI agent to fill in the blanks like he did when he wanted me to guess what cases he was referring to. And he said, eventually, "I'd like to see pictures of little girls." And then the FBI agent says, "Child pornography?" And then he says he wouldn't call it that, just said again, pictures and videos of little girls. He said he thought he might have such evidence.
It's what it's called.
Yeah. He was like, just go into the evidence locker and pull out some child pornography so I can see it.
No,
that's not how this works, sir. Sorry. No. And he had to leave the room for a minute because he was like so angry and so like disgusted. So, and then he says basically that he was worried that his motivation behind confessing was not to give closure, but to see what he could get for his confession. So then he brings another investigator in with him named John, and they ate lunch with Stainer. And so it said, this is the quote, "As John and I ate lunch with Stainer, he began to get morose, aware he was potentially setting himself up for execution. This is going to be my last pizza," he said. Then he says, "Never got to see Star Wars," and just like continually randomly says things that he's never going to get to do. And like all the stuff losing his freedom meant to him, which I'm like, fuck you.
Right? Like that's another thing that we commonly see is how the consequences of their actions are going to affect them.
Yeah. Not the people that they murdered or the families they left behind, right?
Right.
So then he says, this is another quote, the FBI agent says, trying to convince him, like, it's good that you're confessing. He says, "You're going to feel good. Not good, but you're going to feel peaceful. Probably a feeling you haven't had in a long time. Then Stainer said, "It means I can die with a clear conscience now, whenever that day comes. I know they're going to give me the death penalty. Even if I confess, they're going to give me death." Which, you're a serial killer, so chances are high, yeah. Maybe you should have thought about that before you started killing people. Then he says, "It's weird because I love life so much." And then he goes, one minute he said he'd be enjoying time with friends, marveling at nature and thinking high-minded thoughts. And the next minute, it's like I could kill every person on the face of the earth. It just mentally tortures you, he said, constantly back and forth like a tennis match. And then the FBI agent says, "But this is over now. You've taken control today. You're controlling you, probably for the first time since you were 11. I asked him if his family knew about the tremendous internal issues with which he was struggling. He said he had never told anyone until now, not even his closest friends." So then the FBI agent's like, "Well, don't you feel like you should deal with these demons?" And then this is another quote. His anguish was palpable. He had first started imagining scenarios of harming women and girls when he was just 6 or 7 years old. The thoughts were alarmingly sadistic even at a young age. He imagined having a neighbor girl trapped in an underground bunker when he was just 8. And became only more so as he grew older. He's 37 now, and for over 3 decades, a war had waged inside him. The thoughts and fantasies that consumed him preceded his brother Stephen's kidnapping when Stainer was 11, and his own sexual victimization by his uncle, which happened about 6 months thereafter. Those experiences certainly were damaging and poured fuel on a fire that had already begun to smolder as Stainer grew up in an environment rife with dysfunction and twisted sexuality. So then it would go on to say, like, a psychiatrist who later evaluated Stainer for the defense team would say the Stainer family tree was riven with mental illness and sexual abuse that went back 5 generations. And I'm just paraphrasing now. According to the report, Stainer's father, Delbert Stainer, was ordered into therapy for molesting his own daughters, which I couldn't find anything to confirm or deny this, right? Mm-hmm. There's nothing in the documentary that I just watched about it, but why would the family want to admit to that? And I would hope that if he had really molested his daughters, that he would have been arrested and they would have been taken away. However, I don't know how things worked back then, right? Or if maybe he didn't even, it wasn't, maybe they didn't report it, which would be illegal because if he went to counseling, it would have to be reported. I don't know. There's lots of things. So this may or may not have happened, right? And as we've discussed before, the defense can pay anyone really to say whatever they want. In addition to her father's unwanted advances, one of Stainer's sisters said that Carrie started peeping on her, and this is a quote, and inappropriately touching her when she was 10. A cousin would say that he spied on her and her sisters and a neighbor girl hiding under their beds and secretly videotaping them in the bathroom and the bedroom, which, ew. One relative described child sexual abuse as, this is a quote, like a family sickness because it had been going on for so many generations. This is all quotes from this book, which I kind of want to read now, like, because there's other cases, just because for me, like I've said before, true crime to me, I'm interested in it because I'm like, why the fuck would anyone do that? And I just would find it interesting that this guy investigated so many cases and just to kind of see. And just this portion of the book, it's like, what the hell? So this is a quote. The fact that Stainer's brother was kidnapped by a pedophile and abused for 7 years adds an almost unfathomable dimension to the tragedy that enveloped this family. As the older brother, Stainer felt a natural, if undeserved, sense of responsibility for not protecting Stephen from harm. He also felt more directly responsible. And then he told a psychiatrist who was hired by the prosecution to evaluate whether he was sane at the time he committed the killings, that as a child he worried that obsessive thoughts he had about holding the neighbor girl against her will somehow cause Stephen to be kidnapped. Stainer's parents would testify at trial that they both withdrew emotionally after Stephen went missing. This is the quote. I'm still continuing to read from this book. Delbert swung between all-consuming efforts to find his missing son and suicidal depression. He was so bereft when Stephen was taken that he pushed Carrie away. He would make comments like, his real son's gone. I'm just paraphrasing now. Kay said her own father had told her to view Stephen's kidnapping as a good thing because she had fewer kids to worry about because they had 5 kids. She said her father insisted she never cry or show emotion because then she would appear crazy, which...
Sure.
Yeah.
Sure.
Despite it all, Stainer still loved his family and he asked to be incarcerated near them. Carrie was sentenced to death and as of 2022 remained on death row at San Quentin. Now, I'm not sure if you caught that, but In case not, Carrie Stainer is the brother of Stephen Gregory Stainer. Stephen Gregory Stainer was abducted on December 4th, 1972 when he was just 7 years old. Stephen would be held captive for 7 years. However, we'll dive into Stephen's experiences next week with our part 2 of this episode.
Okay.
For now, we'll end with that, the end of Carrie Stainer's portion of this story.
Thank you for listening. Additional information for each case can be found on our website, truthliesandalibis.buzzsprout.com. New episodes will be uploaded every Monday. Find us on Facebook and Instagram at Truth Lies and Alibis.